If you're a movie collector, you need Movies Anywhere. It pulls your favorite purchase movies from participating digital retailers into one central place, so you can finally say goodbye to scattered movie collections and hello to an organized library. With Movies Anywhere, you can watch your favorite movies on any compatible device, whenever and wherever you want. Ready to grow and enjoy your digital collection? Visit moviesanywhere.com/welcome and register for free. Registration with Movies Anywhere required. Open to U.S. residents 13 and over. Gearheads know that some projects need so many parts, it feels like you need a whole storage unit just to store them. That's what eBay Motors' 122 million parts are for. Think of it as your virtual parts garage. They've always got the right fitment at the right prices. Use the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
Hey everyone, this is the Almost World Podcast. Bringing to you mind-blowing interviews with guests from all over the world. So settle down, relax, and enjoy the show. Oh yeah, by the way, if you like the podcast, please support Elmo's World Podcast on Patreon. Your support is what helps the podcast improve more and more. Welcome to Elmo's World Podcast. This is Elmo Ador Jr., your host, and I have a friend, and his name is Rishi. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Hrishikesh, short for Rishi. I live in Hyderabad, which is in southern India. I work with the Indian government. I work on preserving historical heritage. I work on restoring ancient buildings of the city. And I'm glad to be on your podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for accepting, man. And I want to get down to business, ask you, you said you were an agnostic earlier. Why do you have this position? Why, or I guess it's a position of doubt. Why?
I do mainly because Hinduism does have many rituals in it. It's a very ancient religion. It has many rituals and a couple of superstitions as well. I have no way of quantifying if God exists or not. I don't know if he exists. Maybe there's a divine force, but for now, I haven't found any way of proving that he exists. Uh, uh, I mean, if I can't see it, if I can't perceive it, I cannot be assured of its existence. So, in that way, which is what has led to my agnostic beliefs. And I also kind of, as a child, I kind of grew up in, a conservative Hindu family during my early years. And I couldn't relate to many of the rituals myself. So I thought to myself, what's the point of, following most of these rituals if you can't connect with them? And there's no way of verifying if there's a divine spirit or not. So, you know, so because of that, that kind of led to my current attitude towards.
Okay, so yeah, Rishi, I wanted to ask then, to you, what would you count as evidence for God? And so, because you seem that there's, I think you don't believe there is sufficient evidence for God. That's why you're an agnostic. So, what are these?
If God did exist, I mean, there would have been some intervention by now. I mean, we see so many sins being committed every day. We see so many wrongs being committed. If there was some sort of divine force, there would have been some intervention by now.
True.
Uh, so I see these things, and you think to yourself, is there a God or not? I would be happy if there was a God, but I mean, I don't know. There's just no way of knowing.
Well, some would say there are a lot of ways you can know. For example, like revelations, specifically the Bible, Quran, maybe from Hindu philosophies. So, how would you account for all of these?
There actually, I don't know, but I recall sort of reading about this earlier. Many religious and spiritual experiences are linked to certain sections of the brain. They're linked to how you actually perceive reality. Um, that's there, and to a large extent, if you look at most of these religious scriptures and books, if you look at most of them, most many of them are sort of based a lot on the societies which existed at that point of time, and they sort of reflect the context of the societies. So if you look at that then, and then if you look at it now, you actually realize it's actually more human than divine. Because if it was something divine, it would be universal. But then if you look at even Islam, it kind of reflects like Arab society at that point of time. And if you look at Buddhism, Buddhism takes a lot of influence from Hinduism. And because Hinduism was a parent religion. So I was thinking, I mean, there's just too many human similarities to have something. If there was something that was completely divine, it would be universal. But I don't see that universality at all.
I see. In this case, then your criteria for what would be divine revelation is that it is universal, right? And but in terms of like the Quran, for example, I have reason to think that it is sort of universal. Like for example, how they preserve the language, how some would say that the mathematical um, rhythms or equations, I guess, of the Quran, of how it's written. It's something a lot would say it's perfect, and it even challenges people uh, to to make a claim that the Quran made a mistake in this part of it. You know.
I mean, yes, but I mean, if you look at rhythms, human beings have been sort of they've been creating rhythms for a very very long time. And if you look at Islamic geometry as well, it's reflected in most of the mosques and the dargahs. Dargahs are basically religious uh, outhouses, the religious outhouses. So if you look at most of them, you do see like some sort of pattern. And most of these patterns, like they do have roots in those societies. For instance, geometry and algebra, they took a lot of influence from ancient Persia. And ancient Persian architecture was known to use a lot of geometry. Byzantine architecture used a lot of symmetry. And so if you kind of look at these things, you actually realize that what we actually admire as very, very divine actually has some sort of connection to the human experience. So that's what kind of makes me reflect as to whether or not this is like genuine or if it can be debated.
In this case, though, I wanted to ask, for you, what would be the meaning of life? Because when you are an agnostic, you don't have this divine foundation of something like a divine command or divine purpose. So how do you act in your life right now?
So my purpose is based mostly on my upbringing. I I mean I'm personally non-religious, but one of the things that you do learn when you're in part of an Indian family is that you need to kind of make your impact on the world. What I mean when you say impact, I mean there are two different things. For an Indian family, that's about climbing the ladder and making a name for yourself. But like for me, the thing is, I was sort of brought up with this message that you have a lot of potential and that you should try to change the world. And I feel like that's my purpose. I work with the government and I try to restore historic buildings. And so I think to myself that even if there isn't any sort of religious revelation, my purpose could actually be something related to what I wish to see in society, like my dream or my vision for society.
Okay. So what would be your dream and vision for society then? In that case.
It's actually interesting. I mean, despite being non-religious, I actually do see a role for religious institutions in the future. I believe that many of the institutions that we have today, like the UN, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, IMF, many of these institutions are very, very impersonal, and they don't embody the spirit of charity that earlier religious institutions used to have. So in my future, I would like to see religious institutions which sort of play a more active role in people's lives in terms of committing to social justice, you know and in terms of committing to social justice. And I also want to see a decrease in things like social media. I think there should be a huge reduction in social media, and I think the focus should be more on the local. Uh, Religion and culture both are very local forces, and which is why I see a bigger role for these things. If you look at even environmental preservation, it's strongly linked to religion. Because if you're not attached to the land, if you're not attached to your local town or village, then it's very difficult for you to preserve the environment, because preserving the environment can never be entirely global. It's linked to the community. So, which is why I see environmental preservation, local development, and and culture and religion. I see all these things as part of one whole. So,
Okay, but ultimately, though, if you have this sort of vision for the world, I would say it would be utterly meaningless in the end, I guess, because ultimately, human civilization will have its end, and therefore, like, what your purpose here in life is also, in a way, sort of nihilistic. How would you respond to that?
I mean, the thing is, I mean, even assuming that human civilization were to come to an end, if you actually look at it, every species in this planet has sort of made its mark, and it's kind of left its legacy behind. So even, let's say, maybe 2 millennia from now, let's say we were to disappear, or let's say our civilization were to get destroyed. The thing is, we would still kind of leave our legacy behind, and another species, when it kind of sprouts out from the ruins, they will sort of embody the legacy that we leave behind. So in that way, I feel that we're all sort of connected to each other, and which is what the point is of most religions. It talks about the interconnectedness. Even in Hinduism, there's the concept of impermanence, that nothing that is material will remain permanent. So the thing is, even if everything ends at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily end, because it'll be the start of another cycle, and that new cycle will actually have elements of the previous cycle.
So let's talk about your philosophy. You named yourself in the group chat Eastern Ubermensch. That was interesting. I love Nietzsche, by the way, and so why that name?
uh, okay, I call myself that because uh, I believe I always try to be a better version of myself every time, and every day. And I was kind of fascinated by Nietzsche's concept of Ubermensch, that the superhuman. I think and for me personally, when I try to be a better version of myself every day, I think this kind of concept really resonated with me. So, which is why I sort of it kind of appealed to me, and I like comic books and superhero movies, and yeah.
But in this case, though, do you have your own perspective or take on what Nietzsche means in his Ubermensch? And does it actually reflect what track society is on right now?
I mean, the Ubermensch thing was very personal to me. I mean, it was not in any ways related to how I perceive society or how I wanted society to be. It was something very personal to me, because if you look at Nietzsche's life, it wasn't a very accomplished life. He didn't achieve a lot, but he still had these visions of grandeur for himself, and I kind of admire that quite a bit, because it doesn't, despite the challenges that he faced, he was still he was still optimistic about who he was as a person, and I found that pretty admirable. So I mean, I don't see this in any way connected to how I envision society, but it appealed to me on a personal level.
Okay. So in this sense, though, you said you work in for the government in a for cultural heritage, I guess. Is that what you said? So, in this case, I guess that you could mix your passion or your purpose with what you do in your workplace or career, right? So, in this sense, what have you learned, or maybe what philosophical wisdoms have you gained from this work, and maybe you can share it to the audience right now.
This is a bit of a hard question because, working with the government, there are some things that you have in mind which you want to achieve. There are things that the government wants to achieve. There are things that the people want. These three things are always competing priorities, I would say. Uh, One of the things that I've learned, working in the field of heritage is that there's something that goes beyond heritage. It's not just about a historic building. Ultimately, what people want is a good and vibrant community life. They want, I would say, some people, it's a bit of a controversial statement. I shouldn't say it, but more than anything else, people want as to have a sense of community. They want to feel as if, if there's a celebration happening, they can get together. Uh, the big advantage with preserving historic markets and historic monuments and buildings is that these places have had communities which have been living in them for hundreds of years. If you were to destroy them, you destroy the community, and the community would just entirely disappear. And that would also sort of lead to chaos within the city because it's only when communities thrive that the city thrives. So that's one of the things is that when we've actually worked on preserving many historic monuments and many historic buildings, we actually interact with the communities over there. And when we restore these buildings and we restore these places, the communities thrive. The real estate prices rise. One thing is the real estate prices really rise, and the other thing that happens is that tourism. There's a big increase in tourism. People go to the boutique shops to buy bangles. Bangles, by the way, are Indian ornaments, and uh, they buy jewelry, which is a big part of Indian culture. So they buy these things. It's a vibrant ecosystem, and I would say that at the end of the day, it's not just about heritage. It's all about the communities. It's all about what the people want and making them happy.
Yeah, yeah. In this case, though, now that you mentioned the government, I want to ask: does the government actually actively go on projects to preserve historical monuments like these? For example, in the sense that there would be no marginalized people. For example, let's say Muslims.
Yes. Sorry, could you rephrase your question?
Because you're from India right now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and it seems to me that in terms of the issues with Kashmir and India, there is
Yes.
there is that.
There's a religious tension. In my city has a strong Islamic heritage. All the monuments that we work on, all the buildings that we work on are Islamic monuments. So the kind of the Hindu temples that you see on National Geographic, it's not entirely the case over here. We have more Middle Eastern monuments, and very often in those markets and in those historic areas, it's Muslims. They're mostly Muslims. Many of them are very poor. Many of them many of them are marginalized, and many of them. The thing is, their condition is very precarious. Let's put it that way. They live in very, very vulnerable conditions. when you actually restore a monument, what happens is that you improve the facilities. You make sure that there's air conditioning, there's ventilation, there's more hygiene, that people are sort of brought into the formal sector. They don't exist in the informal sector anymore. They're brought into the formal sector. And when they're brought into the formal sector, they won't be exploited by those who are actually more powerful than them. So, in that way, in this city, if you are to actually preserve a historic monument, 98% chance it will be a Muslim one. So,
Okay, but I guess that uh, I want to ask then, is there Islamophobia happening in India? Because I've talked to a lot of my friends, and they say that the government itself is actually pro Hindu, and they just ignores the Muslim community
slippery
overall.
question, man. Slippery question. I work with the provincial government, but with permission, if I may, I would not like to discuss this too much.
Okay.
But because in my capacity as working with the government, it is not advisable.
Mm-hmm.
There are religious tension. There are certain religious tensions right now. The country is kind of going through that phase,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and it is very sensitive. I mostly try to stay off it. I'm not a very political person. I just focus on what I do. I like beautiful buildings. I try to restore them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't look beyond what's happening in the country, apart from just a superficial interest. I don't go beyond that. So yeah.
Okay. Um, so my question would also include your take on Christianity. I guess that you were also brought up in this environment. How would you analyze Christianity in its own merits and say that I would just prefer to be agnostic in this sense? It doesn't seem convincing to me.
I mean, I don't know much about Christianity apart from the fact that it's an Abrahamic religion, along with Islam and Judaism. But I will say one thing, that what appeals to me personally about Christianity is firstly the concept of redemption. I think that's a very big theme in Christianity, which I'm kind of really fascinated by. And if you in fact go to most of these churches, you feel a sense of peace there, and you feel as if anyone can be redeemed. And I think that thing is very beautiful about Christianity. And another thing is actually forgiveness. If you look, I studied in Europe, and I actually saw that many of the churches over there, despite the fact that the Christ is crucified, and it's a lot of suffering, there's also a sense of peace. There's also a sense of things can be better, things can be redeemed. That's what I like about Christianity. I mean, I don't know much about the religion, but yeah, I guess, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess that if you haven't considered Christianity, I would recommend taking a look and maybe accepting Jesus Christ into your heart. But I'm not here to proselytize you. But another question that has come to my mind is, when it comes to your view on the afterlife, do you believe in a life after death?
I hope there is. I really hope that there's a life after death. I'll be happy if there's one. But I don't know. I guess I just don't believe. I just don't believe in it. There's not enough proof. There's not enough evidence. I'll be happy if you tell me that in my next life, like I'll be like a beautiful place full of meadows and snow-capped mountains or something like that. I'll be happy if there's an afterlife like that for me. But
Well, we are
I don't know.
actually
I
we're
don't think it
actually
exists.
we're actually already living in a world with beautiful meadows and beautiful mountains, but in the sense that but there is an urgency though. For example, like this sort of hell that's waiting for you in the afterlife. It is some very compelling to look into these things, and being agnostic doesn't seem to answer these questions.
It is difficult because, I mean, one thing I will say is that people who, when you believe in something, like, you get a lot of strength out of it. Uh, that's one thing that religious people like, and that gives people confidence when it comes to leading their lives. I mean, I personally, I'm not really convinced. I would be happy if someone told me tomorrow that there's a God and there's an afterlife. That would make me feel reassured. It really would. I would be happy. I would embrace it fully. But I just have no evidence. I have no proof, and that's why I assume that as things were, they will always be.
Hmm. But well, you do know that as things were, and they will always be, you will at some point in your life die, like all of us, and but we don't know what's gonna happen when we die, or where the soul will go, or if we do have a soul. So it's very I guess essential to take a look into that matter.
I guess the closest thing that that will probably come to a soul, after we die, is that maybe our children will remember us. So that way, maybe our grandchildren will remember us. So maybe afterlife is something similar to that. Maybe our spirit lives in them. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from that, nothing that I can see.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's talk about your views on what is good and evil. I guess that every person has this more subjective moral standard in which they live in their day to day lives. What would be, in your case, your own personal standard of what is good and what is bad?
I mean, personally, I try to be as good a human being as possible. uh, I am not a troublemaker. I try to be as kind as possible to everyone else. Um, as for I mean, if it feels right, if your conscience tells you that something is right, then I think you should do it. Uh, if it's wrong, then I guess it's wrong. I mean, harming anyone in any way is wrong, and or like humiliating someone is not right, or murdering someone is not right. So if your conscience tells you that something is wrong, it's wrong. Otherwise, it's right.
Exactly, and but when you refer to your own conscience, do you always agree with it? Because sometimes your conscience says, "Oh, taking this money is good," or but in a sense that you would regret what your conscience actually tells you. So, do you always abide by your conscience, or?
Yeah, I mean, so here's the odd thing. From my personal experience, there is a straightforward kind of conscience which you kind of draw justifications from when you try to decide if something is good or bad. There are other things. For instance, I come from a very privileged family. I come from a very privileged family, and I didn't really have to struggle much for anything much. And well, one of the things that your conscience always asks you is, because you were endowed with so much, because of those things. I mean, are you sort of taking it for granted? And I live in a very unequal country. So I sometimes ask myself, when the rest of the country is living in so much poverty, is it morally right to be privileged? Is one thing I kind of ask myself. Apart from that, once again, this is very subconscious, this is very unconscious. Uh, Apart from that, I don't really see any kind of conscience which bothers me in any other way. So
Okay, so in this sense, though, you I would, it's not to offend, but you would be no different from, let's say, Hitler, or for instance, because for Hitler, his conscience would tell him that what he's always been doing is right, all the Holocaust and everything. So in this sense, your own moral standards would be no different from Stalin, or other evil men.
oh, come on, man, that's a bit harsh because I didn't oversee a genocide or do anything like that. But the thing is, I'm not a very confrontational person, and if I feel something is right, then I do it. I have a personal standard when it comes to doing things. I don't try to harm anyone. I don't try to do anything that will offend a person. I think I'm not too familiar with the ideological standards of morality, but from a personal standpoint, if something feels right to me, then I would do it. And yeah, I guess that's all. You know, it's very instinctive. It's nothing more than that.
Okay, I respect that, and just so you know, I didn't want to offend you or anything. It was just a comparative analysis. Okay, so another question that has come to my mind is when it comes to, for example, um, your own understanding of who you are or your identity. Is it something that or are we simply evolved apes just here to have sex and eat and sleep and die, or is there a greater goal for in this life?
Why not both? Is my question. Because we can do both. I mean, the thing is, one of the big fallacies. I wouldn't call it a fallacy, but I would say one of the misconceptions that people have is that just because you experience lust does not mean you can't experience love. Just because you eat a lot like a glutton doesn't mean you can still do a good job and you can still go to the gym at the end of the day. So I think it's both. I don't think it's either this or that. It's a combination of both. I feel this also Maslow's hierarchy. So if your basic needs are met, then you focus on bigger things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Then can I ask you about your views on politics, but not in India, but essentially, what sort of political system should reign over most governments? For example, let's say, um, should the government provide less taxes, more taxes, that kind of stuff? What are your
Tricky
views on that?
question. Tricky question. Um, every country's politics are very different. Is very different. India's politics is very complex because there are too many variables here: religion, caste, geographic community. I mean, I'll be honest on this one. I'm not entirely sure which system would be the best, but there are some things that you can take into account while considering how good a system is. One thing is that it should be stable. It should be very, very stable. If the thing is, I mean, every empire will fall, but the marker of a good empire is how long it lasts. You know, so the thing is, your institutions need to be stable. I think that's one good. That's one very, very important variable while deciding whether political system is good or not. Number two, there should be clarity in the rules of a system. The more complex a political system is, the the more confounding it becomes for the citizens, which is what bureaucracy is. What happens in the bureaucracy is that it's this long list of forms, things that you can do, that you can't do, and things like that. There should be clarity in the rules. And thirdly, there should be some sort of consensus. When I talk about consensus between the people and the government, there should be some sort of consensus. I'm not saying this consensus needs to be 100%. It needs to be 100% solid, but there needs to be some sort of consensus. You can't just have like people who completely disagree with the state or a state which completely disagrees with the people. These are just broad things which I feel are important for a system, political system. But if you're asking me as to which system is the best, I can't really think of any because each one has its flaws. Uh, if you have an oligarchy like Russia does, that's not very great either. If you have a messy democracy like we do, that's not very great either. Look at China; it's developed so much, but it's a dictatorship. So if you ask me, I can't really think of any ideal system like that. Maybe we can take the best of different systems and put it together like a cocktail.
Yeah, but in this case though, because as you said, like we have a world where every region has its own culture, religions, and its own problems, you know. But when it comes to, for example, third world outsourcing, um, I would see this as a new form of slavery, I guess, because of, for example, the sweatshops and all that stuff. How would you view this?
I don't think it's right, mainly because it's this kind of system that we currently live in. It's based on a system of it's based on the assumption that resources will go on forever. It'll that I think is the main problem. The fact that you have sweatshops and you have factories in different parts of the world, and the working conditions are not very great over there. That itself is based on an endless system of exploitation of resources. What happens is that when you keep exploiting resources all the time, you also assume that you'll keep growing all the time. It's like when you're young and your parents keep indulging you with different things. That didn't happen to me, by the way. My parents are pretty strict. Sucks. So, but I do know that if your parents keep indulging you, you think that it can kind of go on forever, and then the child kind of grows up to be spoiled, and he goes to the real world where he realizes that things don't work the way it works at home. I'm giving this example because that's the kind of situation that our world is in. It's kind of, it endlessly exploits resources. When you endlessly exploit resources, what also happens is that the laborers kind of just become cogs, where their job is just to process those resources in different ways: primary, secondary, and tertiary sector. I think this is actually the main problem with our current society. And one thing is endless extraction of resources and its aftermath. And secondly, there's no regard for sustainability. One thing is using all the resources. The second thing is not paying any attention to those resources being recycled in different ways. So I think this is the main issue with today's world. So yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it's true. When you, for example, when we talk about this, um, uh, I remind myself of the, I guess, the cruises, international cruises, because in this industry, like 80% or 90% of the crew members that are hired are actually from the Philippines. And if you research, yeah, if you take a look into what work environment they have, it's really horrible. Like, it's really really horrible, and it's something that they couldn't get away with this with U.S. citizens or European citizens, but they can verily and easily get away with such conditions with people, workers from third world countries. And this is something that I we have to look into, because I guess that it's part of economics, it's part of capitalism, but it's just because it works, just because it's okay in part of the system doesn't mean that it should be, that it's moral. And so when you ask me, what political system should we have, it's different from what moral system we should have. So it's really different. But in this case, though, because when we consider, like, for example, Marxist or communist systems, it just doesn't work because of human nature, because of how we are genetically inclined. But I hope to see a future where, if robots or AI are the only workers, then I guess that they would just have to pay us universal basic income.
It's a very uneasy future, because even if that happens, it would still be it would still be difficult, because the way human beings are, they'll always find a way to co-opt resources. And I think that is dangerous for a system. And you think that you can keep that you can keep consuming without any end. And that's what the banking sector is also based on. They think they can keep manipulating money for endless generations. Markets and things like that. That's what worries me more than anything else. Or we can always argue it's a very foolish thing to do. It's a very stupid thing to do, because the 2008 2009 crisis. But our lives are short, and in our short lives, we can't perceive much damage. It should be done in future generations. So
And what's fascinating is that India has a unique factor in their own in your own system. It's what you call the caste system. Well, in my country, there's no such thing as that. It's really surprising. I guess that it doesn't actually mean that just because you're Brahmin, you're rich. You know, it's not really more wealthy against poor. It's just this ancient traditional system that is in place for thousands of years. How do you look at this, and what are your views on what its impact on the country is?
there are two things here. One thing is that the caste system is obviously wrong. It's horribly unjust. It's terribly wrong. The other thing is also that the market economy has changed the nature of caste quite a bit. Uh, it's similar to how you perceive it, but in many ways it's also very different. Uh, these days, caste is based on. I can tell you one thing, that most of rural India is things are based on caste. In urban India, things are changing. In urban India, caste is based on certain things which are very specific to how Indian cities are changing. The ability to speak English, where you stay. I mean, your last name does matter, but if you can speak very good English, and if you can, you know, if you do live in the right area, that becomes a caste on its own. And then for many generations, they'll find out that, oh, your father lived in this area, and this was his last name, and he lived in this area, and he was a rich man, and then that becomes like, that perpetuates itself, and it becomes very generational. I think I think the whole nature of the market economy and capitalism, it's changed caste quite a bit. It's similar to how some people perceive it, but also different because industrialization's changed India quite a bit. So that's how it works in India.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But also in terms of like politics, there what's interesting is that a certain caste has more privilege than the others. For example, the middle class and lower classes have like free tuition and free and a lot of free stuff compared to what upper class would have.
Yeah, that's a good question. In fact, this is something which has been vigorously discussed quite a bit. One of the things is that caste discrimination begins at a very early age. I would say. I will say this. It begins at a very early age, and you know, let's say you're in an Indian village and you belong to a lower caste. You'll be sitting at the back of the class while the teacher's teaching you, and the kids who belong to an upper caste, they'll be sitting at the front of the class. It starts at a very early age. You'll be served less food. Those things start at a very early age. And one of the things is that by the time they actually enter university, or by the time they enter university, it becomes kind of part of their mentality. The big problem with the whole Indian affirmative action policy, or we call it the reservation policy, is that they don't actually tackle it when it comes. They don't actually try to make cultural changes like at the very beginning. What they do is, you enter university and then they say something like 50% is reserved for members of this caste. They would say something like that. What they don't seem to understand is that it starts at a very early age. From the time you're born, it starts then. Just because you enter university doesn't mean, and you have reservations, you reserve a certain number of seats, that's not going to automatically change how they're treated. So this is a big this is the big fallacy with government policy. Now,
Wow.
if you do point this out, it's very controversial, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. But when I can I ask, is it political? Is it religious, or is it just a culture thing? When some for someone to, oh, okay. Then in this case though, for example, if the government were to impose like a secularism in terms of how the caste system should be removed from the country itself, who would respond? Like which institutions would respond? Would the religious ones be, or cultural, or is it or political ones?
Good question. This is a good question. I'm trying to think because I have been to rural India, but I haven't been in rural India that much. So I'm trying to think because there are many variables over here. There's political, there's cultural, and there's religious. So I mean, it has to be all three, in my opinion, because a lot of caste discrimination happens in rural India, and uh, I don't know about other countries, but in India we have something called the panchayat. So the panchayat is a village institution. It's composed of a group of elders who belong to an upper caste. These people are linked to people in the government, and what also happens is that you have these politicians, who kind of advertise these freebies to people of different castes. They say, if you belong to my caste, I give you this. It's like appeasement. It's like populism. I would say that ultimately it has. I would say ultimately it has to start from a religious basis because caste is something that's very specific to Hinduism. So it needs to start from on a religious level, at the grassroots level, but to spread awareness, it needs to be political.
Well, let's say I was someone who was a Christian Indian. I don't care about the religious stuff. If a policy of the government were to be enforced against the caste system, would I care about this?
Oh, dude, you're asking some controversial questions. I'll tell you why. I don't mind answering them, but India right now and stuff like that. So I will say this: just because caste is something that's very integral to Hinduism, it's also integral to Indian society. If you convert, doesn't necessarily mean that the caste system is going to go. People are still going to assume that you're a Christian convert. You know, to People will still kind of associate you with that caste. So so in response to your question, it has to start on a religious level. So it has to start at the very rock bottom, in the villages. But it works like this. Let me give an anecdotal example because that's generally what I'm good at. So uh, let's say there's a random person who belongs to a lower caste in the village, and let's say that he starts a movement in his village to abolish caste. People will start to recognize him, and then he'll get elected into the village council. After he gets elected into the village council, then he'll join the provincial council. He'll join the town council. After that, he'll join the provincial council. By the time he gets to the national level, he would have passed a bill. He would have passed a bill or an amendment to abolish the caste system. So it works like that. On a local level, you need to kind of change people's minds. For it to become legal for the political. Let's put it that way.
I see. I see. So but can I ask then, for example, when you describe the rural villages, like what's the difference? Like, I guess there could be cities, there could be provinces, but what's the difference between the culture and communities in the villages and more urban societies, parts of the society?
Good question. It's a world apart. It's a huge, huge, huge world apart. In fact, in most countries, you would not find a bigger cultural divide between the rural and urban regions than India. Rural India is kind of still stuck in, like centuries before. Okay, like so if you go to the cities, you'll find some places which look like Hong Kong or Manhattan. So some of the places look like that. But if you go to the villages, it's just not very great. On top of that, traditions are very, very strong there. You have like different parts of the village where different caste members stay. So if you belong to an upper caste, you stay in the center of the village. If you're a lower caste, you don't even live inside the village. You live outside the village. You know, so it's very traditional. And the cities are very different. The reason why caste cannot survive in the cities is because cities are all about immigrants. You cannot, so people cannot find out which caste you belong to. So it's because people are complete strangers to each other. So when you're a complete stranger to to one another, how can you find out which caste the other person belongs to? In the cities, there's only a difference between your migrants and local people. In the villages, there's a difference between members of different castes.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been very interesting, I guess, and we seem to be over time. But one last question, Rishi, because it's uh, been an awesome conversation. I've learned so much, especially about the caste system and your own views on life and its meaning. My last question would be, what is your vision, or like, I guess, what actions would one take in order to make this world a better place?
Good question. It's just this so overwhelming. So I'm trying to think. So I guess the first one would be we need to start descaling. We need to start descaling things. Right now, things exist on a very centralized level. So you have like the UN, you have the IMF, you have the World Bank, and then you have the nation state. It's just too many central institutions trying to govern large numbers of people. We need to kind of really reduce it. We need to have more local governance. We need to have like local people ruling over local people, because they can connect with each other. So I think that's one thing that's very important. The other thing is, I also think indigenous ways of living need to be revived, which are is very specific to different countries. For instance, in Philippines, for instance, you have those. I'm not very familiar with the Philippines, but Philippines is a Polynesian culture, right? So you have those reed boats, and then you have those nice stilt houses, to prevent flooding, so that kind of this is my knowledge of the Philippines. So, and this volcanic ash, that kind of thing. If you go to any city today, it all looks identical. If I were to go from Mumbai to New York right now, they would look identical, they would look the same. And they use the same forms of exploiting resources. They have the same culture, the same people as well, you know and that kind of so the entire world becomes a machine because of that. And the machine kind of it becomes boring. If you go to Instagram, every second person is kind of having the same story. They go to some different country and stuff like that, and so the entire world kind of becomes a machine. We need more diversity. We need more, different countries having their own specific technology, their own specific culture, and their own specific ways of producing things. We need to have that kind of thing. And thirdly, I think another thing is that we need a specific community of people who can be entrusted with preserving local resources, like tribesmen. How the Native American tribes, they actually like have a person who's in charge of saving a forest. So I think we need two things are very important. One thing is we need to go back to more traditional ways, cultural ways. And we secondly, we need to design a better system for conserving environmental resources.
So that's the end of it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. This is your host, Elmo Ador Jr. And thank you for listening in. And please subscribe. Please follow us on Facebook. Please follow this. Please. Thanks.
It takes a lot of ingredients to fix or build a car, like cooking, but without the frozen dinner easy way out. eBay Motors has 122 million parts. It's always the right fitment, so you can follow any recipe to a T. Whether it's a vintage Italian coupe that's classic like Grandma's meatballs or a German luxury car that's as complicated as Oma's rouladen, to cook up something great in the garage, use the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
Meet Cocovia Memory Plus with some of the most researched plant-based nutrients harnessing the natural compounds within the cocoa bean. To improve memory and brain function in just 8 to 12 weeks, try Cocovia Memory Plus capsules. Order today at cocovia.com. That's COCOAVIA.com and use coupon code CCV20 to get 20% off your order. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease.